We have now come to the final part of these 2 days dialogue, and I hope all of you feel like it has been extraordinarily informative, intellectually very honest and penetrating, and has provided very fruitful ground for comparison between the Arctic and the Third Pole, and also what we can learn from each other. There are 3 major ice-covered areas in the world: Antarctica, the Arctic, and the Third Pole Himalaya. But Antarctica doesn't have any people or communities. The other 2 are the only ice-covered areas in the world that have nations, communities, cultures, traditions, boundaries, borders. And it is therefore of paramount importance that these 2 regions not only have a dialogue within themselves, but also among themselves. I look at it in a way that we have a moral global responsibility to have that dialogue. Because what happens in our part of the world, the Arctic and the Third Pole, impacts everybody on the planet. Everybody on the planet. There are no other regions on the planet that in that way impact long-term, our planet. Of course, you can have wars and conflicts and so on that have temporary, in the historical sense, influence on the planet, sure. But as we know from history lessons, they come and go. There was a war in Syria about 10 years ago. It's not being talked about very much anymore. There was a great conflict over Libya about 15 years ago, if I remember correctly. It's not being talked about very much today. And we could go on like this. European history is full of wars between France and Germany and other neighbors on the European continent. So, those of us who come from the Arctic and the Third Pole, we feel very strongly this responsibility for the future of the planet. And the great vice representative from Pakistan, who shared the stage here in the first session, said to me something very profound that I had never heard anybody say before. And I told him I'm going to quote him in many different places in the coming months and years. He summed up why he and his country were engaged in the Third Pole dialogue and in this dialogue between the Third Pole and the Arctic. It was a very short statement, as follows: we have lost our future. We have lost our future. Meaning that the melting of the glaciers, the floods in Pakistan, the disasters that are happening, imply that the future is completely different than what they thought just a few years ago. We have lost our future. It's a very simple statement, but I think it's absolutely profound. So we are essentially in the business of giving them back their future. Giving them back their future. And I don't think of any other part of the planet than these 2 where that's the case. And that is why I think the speech by the president of COP28, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber here, the fact that he decided to come to this forum and present this speech, the 3rd speech he makes after he took on this global responsibility, is that he realizes, and he has actually realized that for more than a decade, that's why he was a founding partner in the Arctic Circle, that without preserving the glaciers and the ice-covered areas of the planet, there will be a climate disaster for every nation, every community, every continent. And that is the fundamental connection between the global climate dialogue, which goes under the name of COP, and the decision-making process that goes on within the framework of COP, and what we have been talking about here in those 2 days and will hopefully continue to talk about. So this session is called The Road Ahead. And in a few minutes I will open the floor up to anybody who wants to share your thoughts or comments. And first I will ask my friend here to make his comment, because he carries every day the responsibility of keeping the show on the road in the third pole and the Himalayas. I have been tremendously encouraged by what I have heard in these 2 days from those who come from the Himalaya third pole region. And my thoughts go back more than 10 years when I started having the first discussions. Remembering, for example, the meeting I had in the house of Sonia Gandhi, who was then the leader of the Congress Party and then Prime Minister of India. And I brought up the glaciers in the Himalayas. And they told me afterwards I was the first person ever to bring their attention to the glaciers in the Himalayas. And looking back on what we had to do in the first years and what we heard in these 2 days, there is a fundamental positive shift. So I think the road ahead can be very promising, very exciting, if the potential of what we have heard here continues to grow. So my first question to you, and then I will open the floor, is do you share that kind of optimism that we now could really hope for an enhancement of the institutional, scientific, diplomatic effort and how that relates to the global climate effort?
Thank you, Excellency. And thank you, for being the inspiration behind this dialogue, behind this movement, I would like to call it, the process of, first of all, recognizing the uniqueness, the importance of the third pole. I think you have brought that to the limelight, into attention of the global community. So we are very grateful. Now, answering your question, yes, I feel very optimistic. I feel much more hopeful than when I first came here. I could feel the passion, the energy, and the commitment around this room. I think starting from all the panelists and all the ones who ask questions from the floor, there is so much concern as well as anxiety and willingness to work together, to cooperate. So yes, I think there is still hope for restoring the future. I think maybe not as much as we would have liked, but I think if we don't act now, there would be absolutely no future. So I think that is a very good message. Now, ICIMOD would like to really work hard towards building itself as the go-to place when it comes to mountains and mountain issues and mountain people. The go-to place when it comes to information and knowledge about the cryosphere, what is happening to the glaciers, glacial lakes, rivers in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. We would like to also be the go-to place for solutions in terms of addressing the impact of climate change to the farmers, to our businesses, and also in terms of responding to natural disasters and so on. So, and we would also like to be the place to facilitate the kind of dialogue that is necessary, the kind of forum and exchanges that would be necessary to further enhance cooperation both within the region and between regions and across regions, so on. I think the most important message that we could also take is not to just rely on government-to-government negotiations. I think people-to-people on track two, using all the contexts, the networks that you establish. I think we have been able to build many bridges here. No, I feel very enriched because I've been able to build new bridges here and also have conversations with number of very interesting and resourceful persons around this room. So I think those are very important resources that I can take back and use it to further the agenda that we have in Ron. So I think we have a very important mission ahead, and I would like to request all of you to join on this mission, I think on this journey that has been started by President Grímsson and so many others, and I think we should all be able to come out and chart, together chart out a roadmap beyond COP28, up to COP28 and beyond COP28. And I think this is something that we would really appreciate receiving your advice. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much indeed. And now I open the floor for some comments or insights. If anybody wants to join, I know we are all tired after having been here since early this morning. But I still, maybe everybody agrees. Yes, reference. There's a microphone behind you.
Yeah. First of all, I want to congratulate the organizers. I think the last couple of days have been extremely successful. Meet said something very important about going to other places, and I have very much appreciated leaving what I see as increasingly closed Western echo chambers and groupthink. But I also notice in our group here the last couple of days that, of course, it's a very gender unbalanced group, and I am not sure if there's been any students participating. And I personally think it would be very valuable to get students, PhD students, engaged in this work. I think that is, and that's also how you build the future talent who are interested and knowledgeable about these things. And personally, I would say that I will look carefully at Norwegian funding programs. And Pema and I, we talked over dinner. You work very much with the Norwegian embassy in Kathmandu. So personally, I will look into Norwegian funding programs, especially for like building student activities around this. And I think that would be something I would encourage others to do. Thank you very much.
Well, you're absolutely correct that we have always, within the Arctic Circle, put great emphasis on student and youth participation, and you can see that in the assembly every year in Iceland, an extraordinary number of young people, and they're very active participants. And one of my fondest moments in the assembly every October in Iceland is when these young people all over the great hall, packed with people, 2,000 people, stand up and put questions to the presidents and the prime ministers and all the leaders who come to address and have no idea what kind of questions they are being asked. We tried to reach out to various universities here in Abu Dhabi and the UAE and institutions of research and learning with young scholars. But perhaps the culture here is perhaps more sort of status conscious than it is where we come from, Rasmus. So students have a great respect for the professors and others who have a formal title, which is often lacking in our part of the world. And so we didn't succeed, as is evident from the attendance. But it was also never our aim to have a big forum in the sense of numbers. We wanted primarily to create a stage for a dialogue among informed participants and those who could genuinely contribute to the dialogue. But then we decided, as you have seen, to film all the dialogue here on the stage, and that will be made available through the internet to the entire global audience, both through YouTube publications of the different panels and the sessions, as well as Twitter and Instagram outreach some sections and statements and discussions. So to that extent, these 2 days are just the beginning of a process that will take place in the next 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, where with the help of our secretariat and the staff, we will edit this material to make it available and accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world. Because we are acutely aware that the Arctic and the third pole have that in common, that it's difficult for the people there to travel long distances to be a part of the dialogue. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the extraordinary photographers and the filming people who are here on behalf of the host country to help us to film this in an extraordinary, fascinating way. And the Arctic Circle Secretariat who are here and have had the privilege to look at the footage and the photographs tell me that it's extraordinarily well done in an inspirational way. So thanks to all of you who have been here with us. And I think we should give them a round of applause for the excellent work that they have been doing, because they are the key facilitator that we can offer the global community access to this extraordinary dialogue that has taken place here. And I have to tell you, I have been present at many dialogues on this issue over the years, and these 2 days are the most profound, deep, forward-looking, information-based and scientific-based dialogue on these challenges that I have ever witnessed in a matter of 2 days. And if I compare that to the sessions that were in 2015, 2012, where we organized meetings in India, Bhutan, and so on, there's an extraordinary qualitative sort of progress in this. And I want to thank all of you who have contributed to that. But the floor is still open if anybody wants to make a final comment. Otherwise, we will follow the guidance of ICIMOD. Yes, we will have a final comment here.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Pema, for organizing such a wonderful conference. As you mentioned, both of you mentioned that it would be great to make this third pole process democratic, that where everybody can come and give their views into it. I wondered if, or rather, it would be great if you consider the NGOs working on this area, bring them in the third pole process to work with you, collaborate with you, would be a great way to achieve the mission. Thank you.
Definitely, we'll take note of that. That is, I think, the right approach, and we should be doing that. Excellency, if you allow me, maybe just, I would like to also join you in acknowledging all the support that we have received in terms of making this dialogue possible. Of course, the Third Pole Secretariat, the team have been working very hard. Thank you very much. And it was probably very difficult few weeks for my friend Dagfinnur for getting the invitations and all the arrangements for the members from the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, the delegates from HKH. Although some could not make it because some of the countries are in the stage of closing their annual financial year, so they were not able to make it. The high-level task force members from these countries are very much involved in the process of closing their annual accounts, so they could not make it. But those who have made from Bangladesh, from Nepal, from Pakistan, made very good contributions here, and hopefully next time round we will have all the members present here. And of course, we are very happy that even our local government have been represented, as you have heard this wonderful story today, across the panel, last panel members. I think this is very interesting stories, very inspiring, and I think we are all living on a very high note with the stories that we heard. Then, as I mentioned, I think we have built new bridges, and these bridges, if you allow me and my colleagues to reach out to you over the next weeks and months, so that we could still get your inputs and advice on how we can move faster, because we need to move faster, because we do not simply have the luxury of time, and as I mentioned, the crisis is already there. So we need to move fast and move fast together. I think that is probably the key. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I think with these words, we will close this dialogue. Oh, sorry? More food, yeah, okay. So let me, before we end, point out that our journey will continue in the sense that in the beginning of March, the Arctic Circle Forum in Tokyo will take place. And as you have already heard, the relationship between the weather seasons in Japan and the melting of the Himalayan glaciers is indeed a fascinating connection and demonstration of how the melting of the ice affects everybody. And then, of course, at the Arctic Circle Assembly in October in Reykjavik, we will continue this dialogue in multiple sessions, and we have invited some experts and officials, as well as will invite some ministers from the Himalayan countries to attend. And then, of course, at the COP itself, 28 here in the UAE at the end of November, beginning of December, the hopes are that there will be a fundamental presence of ice and ice-covered countries, both from the Arctic and the Himalaya, in the COP process and the COP decision-making song and dance, as I sometimes call it, that will take place here among the negotiators at the COP meeting itself. So perhaps the coming 11, 12 months are more crucial for the continuation of this dialogue than we have ever had before. In the meantime, ICIMOD and the high-level task force and other platforms in the Third Pole Himalaya regions will continue their work. There will be a change of chairmanship in the Arctic Council from Russia over to Norway in May, if I remember correctly. And nobody really knows how that will be executed, but it will be a part of the Arctic journey in the coming months. So perhaps as we come to the end of this year, we will hopefully be able to look forward to an extraordinary period of progress that began in January, the middle of January here in Abu Dhabi, with these 2 days of dialogue that we have all witnessed. And finally, I want to thank our co-host, the Ministry of Climate in the UAE, for their long-term cooperation. The memorandum on this forum was actually signed more than 3 years ago between myself and Dr. Tani, who was then the climate minister. Then COVID intervened, and we were not able to have it at the time that we planned. And I now say, thanks to COVID, we were able to have the timing of this forum in a much more dramatic and productive way than it would have been if we had had it at the initial date, more than 2 years ago. And I also want to thank the Arctic Circle Secretariat, who has heroically worked from Iceland in trying to bring this international gathering here together in Abu Dhabi. And if you think the American military and the Indian military and the Pakistan military have logistic problem, as was so vividly explained in the previous panel, I can assure you that the Arctic Circle Secretariat often has logistic challenges in organizing these forums in different parts of the world. And we are not complaining. It's a great learning experience, but it also proves it's possible. You can sit in Reykjavik and you can through the dedicated work of a team, especially young women, 2 of them are here, who can bring together these gatherings in different parts of the world. This time in Abu Dhabi, next time in Tokyo, probably in Berlin in the early part of next year. So with those words, I thank all of you who have contributed to the success of this forum. I wish you a great stay for the rest of your time here in Abu Dhabi, and look forward to seeing you in Tokyo, Reykjavik, or again here in the UAE towards the end of the year. Thank you very much. Thank you.